At least 3 dead and more than 300 injured by forces of the Maduro regime in Venezuela trying to prevent food aid from coming in to the country. Is this the end game for Chavismo in Venezuela? Well, we can certainly hope so. Hey, everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is Right Angle, brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Gents, what's going on in Venezuela? You know, Karl Marx liked to talk about late-stage capitalism, which was the sort of decadent stage of capitalism when the socialist state would blossom and then we'd get full communism later. But it always seems to be the socialist states that are in their late stages with starvation and economic collapse, hyperinflation, and all the rest. Venezuela is just the most recent example. So I like to talk about late-stage socialism, but it looks like we've left the late stage and we're into the end game. There was a story in Reuters, it was, after Venezuelan troops block aid, the headline says, Maduro faces diplomatic siege. Violent clashes with security forces over the opposition's U.S.-backed attempt. Don't you love that? As if it's somehow our fault that people are trying to bring food to starving people, but it's Reuters. What are you going to do? To bring aid into the economically devastated country. Who devastated the economy? Reuters doesn't say that.
Just happens, these things.
At least 3 protesters dead near the Brazilian border, which I already told you about. And I guess what I'm trying to ask, and this one's to you, Bill, is where is the American left on this one? They claim to be humanitarians, and Bernie Sanders was on video. I saw this just this morning. Ducking the question when asked if Maduro was a dictator.
You dear child.
Yes.
Where's the American left? Yeah. They're the
know.
same place that the American left was when this happened in Cambodia, and when it happened in Nicaragua, and when it happened in Cuba, and when it happened in Vietnam, and when it happened in North Korea, and when it happened in North Vietnam, and when it happened in Hungary, and when it happened in Poland, and when it happened in East Germany, when it happened in the Soviet Union, when it happened in all of the countries of the Soviet bloc. It takes something as powerfully insane as socialism to make poor people out of Germans, but that's what happened in East Germany. It's what happened in China. It's what happened everywhere else. It's been tried. But see, Steve, the reason it is happening now is because it hasn't been done right. It's such a fine idea, and it's such a brilliantly workable idea. It's just that it's never been implemented correctly. And it always seems to result in the death of hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people from starvation, which I might point out is, by all accounts, the most horrible way to die that anyone has ever been through any of these things or seen. Yeah. It's just simply the most horrible way to die. But it's not fair to say that socialism doesn't produce anything, because it does. It has produced historical records of human starvation, cannibalism, and other products that we just seem to not be so willing to import into the United States because of our obsession with, our gold-plated toilets that those small few of us that participate in the capitalist system are able to purchase. I don't have any serious answer for you, Steve. I know I'm being flip about it. I know I'm being flip and people are dying. I just don't know what to say to people who can't learn this lesson. I don't know what to say to them. I judge them to be mentally insane. I really do. If you could, even in the places where it presumably works, it doesn't work. Even in places like Sweden, which has got a bunch of extremely well-educated, gentle, hard-working people, you find out that in order to keep socialism in Sweden, you have to destroy Sweden as an idea. And that's the only way to make that work. And that's now it's the rape capital of the world or of Europe, and on and on and on it goes. And you get to the point, Steve, where you've said these things so many times, these truths are so self-evident that you simply stop. At least in my case, I stop trying to think about a logical response, and I stop even trying to think about an emotional response. I get to the point where I start thinking about somebody needs to go in there with ambulances and straitjackets and take these people by force into some facility with rubber rooms, feed them, and get them back to health, and then simply give them the years of therapy it must take for them to realize that they keep doing this to themselves in the face of every single mountain of evidence that continues out there. It makes you wonder, what would it take for somebody to realize that this is wrong? What would it take? And apparently, and here's the parts that's actually genuinely, honest to God, in the deepest meaning of the word, tragic. Because you would think, what would it take for somebody to wake up from this nightmare of socialism? And the answer is, in many cases, nothing. And I am reminded of an example of a woman whose case was in a book I read on Stalin. And here's basically what happened to this woman. This is a real person. Her husband was murdered by the communists. Her brothers were murdered by the communists, all of them. Her 3 sons were murdered by the communists. All of the daughters murdered by her communists. All of her male relatives, son-in-laws, were murdered by the communists. Of the family of 29 or 30 people she had, 1 or 2 of them survived. And this woman said, after the fall of the Soviet Union, she said, but still, I still believe in communism. And when you reach that point, you say, well, then okay, I'm dealing with insanity. I'm dealing with people who have watched this system that they like the sound of murder their entire families and everybody around them, reduce their society to wretched poverty and cannibalism, and the idea is still so appealing to them that they can't bring themselves to condemn it, and that's a person who needs advanced psychiatric help. Serious psychiatric help.
And on top of the insane ones, you've got the cynics who support socialism because they see themselves as the person with a nice dacha outside of town and not one of the bodies in the mass grave on the other part of the outside of town.
And do you know what the estimated wealth of Hugo Chavez, champion of the little people, do you know what the estimated net worth of his daughter is?
Yeah, $4 billion.
$4 billion in a country that's slaying dogs. Well, those days are over. Those were those were the salad days. Yeah. They're out of dogs now. Yeah, those were the good old days when you could find a couple of pets on the street or animals in the zoo that you could murder and eat. The daughter of the person who brings the equality of socialism to Venezuela has $4,000 million in her personal bank account. And if you are such a sucker that you still believe in this, if you still believe in Fidel Castro after he starves his nation for 50 years and dies with $900 million in his bank account, and if you support Bernie Sanders, who talks about equality for everybody as he owns 3 houses, never having done a stitch of work in his entire life, then you're beyond. It's not intervention implies a certain amount of like voluntary kind of thing, like Steve, we're a little worried about you. The drinking's getting a little out of control. That's never thought I actually had, but nevertheless, we'd like you to come with us and get some help. I'm not talking about that. And now I'm talking about walking in there and roping these people and taking them away in the same way you take a child out of an abusive situation.
Because they're unable to defend themselves. Yeah.
They cannot. They are incapacitated by the worst idea in human history.
Yeah,
and it's killing them. And I'd love to say, gee, what a surprise, but I don't know what what do you do in the face of such insanity? I'm just speechless, really.
Grown people who have given up their own moral agency for an ideology. I don't know what to do with them either. But the reason I frame this story out of Venezuela, these stories I should say out of Venezuela, in terms of domestic American politics, is the old Alinskyite tactic of holding your opponents up to their own standards. And we've got another example of that in another story here from Venezuela. It's not just food aid being blocked from coming into the country, it's people trying to escape the country. And the Washington Post reports that at Venezuela's border with Colombia, women suffer extraordinary levels of violence. We're talking forced prostitution, we're talking rape, we're talking selling their own children because that's the best that these women have to offer their own offspring. This is the worst situation a young woman could be in that you could possibly imagine. And the question is, Scott, to you, where are the American feminists on this?
Here's what's happening here. And here's how the left and the progressives in the United States can justify this. Basically, they say to themselves, what's happening there is not what I mean when I say socialism. That's not our kind of socialism or social democracy or progressivism or leftist views. They're doing something else. They're not doing what we're doing. And what that takes to be able to say that is, frankly, racism. Socialism and support of socialism is racism. And here's what I mean by that. Because what you're saying is, if we were given those same ideas, we wouldn't take them to the conclusion that almost every other society that's ever tried them, I should say every other society that's ever tried them either did or is in the process of taking them to that logical, horrible conclusion. We wouldn't do that. Why? Can you come up with another reason other than we're white? Can you come up with a reason other than we are?
That's why we...
Can you it's either nationalism or racism. So which is it, my liberal friend? Are you a racist or are you a nationalist? Because you are engaging you are a fabulist. You are somebody who comes up with amazing tales about things that just aren't so. You're an obscurantist. You're somebody who is intentionally darkening, who is intentionally hiding the true nature of a situation so you can justify this set of beliefs that are utopian and in your own mind should work. Now, I'll tell you, and I hate to make a simplistic analogy, but I do website development at a very low level. I do things that should work and don't. But what happens is, after I do the thing that should work and doesn't, I don't do it again. I don't keep doing it over and over and over and saying, well, it should work. I stop doing that and I do something different. Usually something as far different as I possibly can.
Right.
Because the thing didn't work. Now, for you to sit back and say the only reason why socialism doesn't work is because it hasn't been done the right way or hasn't had enough money thrown behind it is the worst kind of nationalistic racism. You are, in effect, a Nazi if you back these ideas. And you've got to stop. I just want to make sure that I was taking notes while
when
Bill
you
was
say
talking.
Nazi, do you mean National Socialist? Is that what you mean?
Essentially,
yeah.
We believe. I wrote this when Bill said something that triggered this. We believe, or the left believes, that we're no better than anyone else. That everybody in the world deserves the same chance because they're all just as good as we are. We are not American exceptionalists. We're no better than anybody else, except when it comes to implementing socialism, in which case we're going to do it right, where everybody else has screwed it up. You are an enabler. The alcoholic who gets in a car wreck and died because of you. And that's what's happening to Venezuela. They are dying because of you. And until you get your racist self out of this mind trip that you put yourself into and back on some logic and some reason and frankly some compassion. Where is your compassion, my leftist friend? Wake up. Stop being such a racist.
Wow.
And I'm sorry, but I just have to add, because this is the salient point. They say that what's going on in Venezuela and Russia and China and so on, they say they're not doing it right. No, they're doing it exactly right. Hugo Chavez's daughter has $4 billion. Fidel Castro has $900 million in his bank account. What do you mean they're not doing it right? They're doing it exactly right. They are running this confidence game the way it's supposed to be run, and they are benefiting from it. And you never, ever, ever hear one of these young revolutionaries like Che Guevara come out of nowhere, launch the big revolution, and then go back into the sugarcane fields where he was working before. It's a scam for personal profit, and it works like a charm. It works like a charm because idiots like you believe this con game. She has $4 billion.
You're either a con or a mark.
Yeah.
That's the socialist
That's why they
game.
call it Marxism.
Yeah.
Ah, I see what you did there. Folks, there's a third story. I forgot to write down where I found this one, but it's a tale of desertion in the lower ranks of the Venezuelan military. And the deserters are saying there's no use taking up arms against Maduro. He's got all the generals in his back pocket. But when I read this story, number one, kudos to the deserters. Maybe they don't have the organization or the wherewithal or whatever to take up arms against Maduro, but at least they're not taking up arms against their fellow citizens, and that's a huge mark in their favor. Let's just set that aside, though, because it's an important point, but it's not the point I want to make. I was reminded, bless you, I was reminded when I read this story this morning of the old Hemingway bit of dialogue from The Sun Also Rises. The question was, how did you go broke? And the answer was gradually, then suddenly. And we learned in the late 1980s that that's how socialist regimes collapse. When I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, the Soviet Union was the preeminent geopolitical fact of Eurasia. It was there, it was massive, it was monolithic, and it was seemingly all-powerful. And the next thing we knew, you had East Germans just with chisels or whatever they could find going after the Berlin Wall. And what was it, 18 months, 2 years after that the Soviet Union just disappeared, the ash heap of history. And it all happened so quickly that people have forgotten. I think most people have forgotten, or in case of the younger generation, have never been taught what a sustained effort it took, what a righteous cause it was for the West to stand up to the Soviet Union. And poof, it was gone. What came after isn't necessarily everything we'd hoped, but it is better. And Venezuela's got some growing pains to go through here. It's going to get worse, and then we can hope that it's going to get better. And that's your right angle on that, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. And I have to tell you, listening to Bill and Scott today, I've never been more proud to do this show. If you'd like to be one of our producers who make this possible, please go to BillWhittle.com and click that membership button, because we'd love to have you on board. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.